Hi everybody, thanks for joining. Hey Paul, nice to see you here. I'm going to kick things off, just running you through the introductory slides as we always do in this maturity model for Microsoft 365 practitioner session. This time around, we're going to be taking a bit of a deep dive into the communication competency, and to make sure that we can do that with some air of authority, guest star, our rock star today is Tara Saylor. We'll introduce Tara properly, or Tara properly later on, but we'll just get through the introductory piece as we usually do. This is the agenda. We'll just give the overview as we always do, just in case there are people that haven't attended previously. And then we're going to try and grab a picture of all you lovely people who have attended today. So be ready to turn your video on at that point. And then at the end, we tend to have a discussion. We do encourage people to chip in with thoughts, questions, comments during the session. So don't hesitate to do that. All you have to do is stick your hand up if you want to, metaphorically, digitally stick your hand up if you want to interject. But our experience is that people don't do that. So there'll be a session at the end where you can air your grievances or otherwise if you wish. Equally, feel free to throw questions or comments into the chat. And we tend to try and sort of curate those as we go along and pick up answers on the fly. So that's what we're going to do. Let's just remind ourselves of where we are with all the different things that we've produced within the model so far. On the left-hand side, we've got our purpose. You can read that while I go on about the other stuff. On the right-hand side, all the things which are kind of properly bold, i.e. not vaguely grayed out, are artifacts which are already published on the docs site within the community area. And so you can see we've got most of, but not all of the competencies produced. I'm afraid we haven't actually finished the last three, and that's been the state of affairs for the last few months, but we will get them done at some point. But just about 2 months ago, we did release two new artifacts, two new documents, which was around running the Microsoft Maturity Model workshop and some different approaches to that. And we've published the majority of the recordings of all our previous sessions on there now as well. So on the left-hand side, all the competencies, in the middle, some of those sort of tools, and then on the right-hand side, supporting documents. Just to remind you about the sort of the underpinnings of the maturity model, we plagiarized the levels 100 through 500 from another organization, as all the best innovations do. But it's really important to us for people to understand when we talk about level 100 through to level 500, what that means, because it is not about how great is the technology. Just because SharePoint does version control or I don't know, Teams does collaboration, doesn't mean that you should automatically have all of those things turned on at level 100. This is really thinking about what the business implications are. Level 100 being we're kind of making it up as we go along. We haven't got much structure. Moving up through level 300, where mostly you've got a pretty good grip on a lot of your processes across the full set of competencies, that communication, collaboration, business process, the stuff we saw on the previous slide. And then moving into the challenging levels of level 400 and level 500, where you're probably doing it because there are real regulatory or financial or other risk impacts for getting things wrong. And on the right hand side of this particular slide, you can see there's a set of useful keywords that help you think about any given department or team or process in your organization or your client organizations that help you think about, actually, for that thing, what kind of level are they really working at, or are we working at? Have we got stuff documented, and does it work most of the time, all the time, or actually has it got some kind of self-improvement process built in? What we did do, though, in the last month is think about a slightly different way of looking at that, based off something that somebody said at the last session. So I've actually put together a set of sort of like intent as it might be spoken by a member of staff or a manager or something. I'm going to read a couple of these out to you. So at the level 100, it's like, let's just keep putting out the fires and keep the lights on and just, keep going with it, guys. And that's level 100. At level 200, you start hearing phrases like, we should ensure that everyone should know what they're doing. We kind of think that people know what they're doing. That's kind of level 200. At level 300, you start to hear people talking about, oh, well, that's according to the policy. And pretty much everybody follows those policies most of the time. And then if someone challenges them and says, oh, how do you know that? I go, oh, we've got some metrics. We look at it occasionally. By the time you get to level 400, you start hearing people saying, oh, we're doing this analysis, we've got metrics, we're doing the reporting, we know this stuff works really well all the time, and we've got a sense of when we're getting exceptions and how we deal with that. And then by the time you get to 500 and you challenge somebody, you just see them grin and go, no, we've really got this under control. We've put in all these processes that make sure that we're assured that things are working as intended, and we've got proactive alerting when things are out of bounds. And actually, most of our processes are self-correcting or trigger responses that correct them with action plans and executive or senior accountabilities. So that's the kind of stuff you see in super regulated industries, and probably only in 1 or 2 departments in those industries. So that's kind of how we thought it might help you think about where are you in that. And thanks, Paul, your comment was kind of instructive there as well. So you can download these slides if you want to go and review what I've just told you. But just moving on, I'll just tell you a bit about the way we run these. We run a monthly practitioner session. This is for people who either want to become sort of professional maturity model practitioners in their own business practice, or want to introduce maturity model thinking and processes into the organization that they work for. And this is to help you get a set of skills and a set of perspectives around how to do that. The idea is that we bring in people like Tara who will give us their perspective, and often people like Tara are not deeply inured in the model. So we're trying to get a bit of an outsider's view to complement what the core team of people like Sharon, Marc, Simon and I have come up with. And so that gives real context and perspective about grab this and see what it means to you in the field. And then we try and make it a safe space. We're going to record most of this stuff, and then towards the end we'll drop the recording out. And if you want to say something provocative or slightly risky or whistleblower or anything like that, you can be sure that we're not going to actually share that stuff with anybody. So again, I invite you to have the conversations with us during this session. Feel free to feed the questions in, and by all means, carry on the conversation after the sessions. There's a number of ways to continue to get involved. There are other resources and other stuff. There's some other things that we do. Community doc sessions, first-time contributor sessions within the community. We've got yet another maturity model call coming up this time next month, and that one I think we're planning to look at collaboration. And Marc, do you want to do the big reveal of who we've managed to get to come in to do this one for us?
Yeah, we're going to have Sue Hanley joining us for that one, which is Sue's a great friend of mine, and can't beat having her around.
Yeah, and I'm very impressed. I've lent on Sue's material a lot of times in the past, so that's going to be terribly exciting. I want to thank everybody who came along to the August event. There's a nice list of thank you lists. And then, because we're rushing through this to leave as much time as possible, what we'd like to do is grab a video. And this is where we ask everyone to turn their videos on. David, do you want to take control of the whole presentation thing so you can do your magic on making this work? But again, everyone who isn't shy and has probably got their clothes on, but you know, that's optional, feel free to fire up your video. Let's see it. Yeah, quite. See if we can get all 49 of us or whatever it is on the call, and then David will grab us and save us for posterity. David, do you want to do the countdown into the grin and wave? Oh, nice shirt.
Absolutely. Give me just one moment. Everybody can see themselves anymore. We have a few, see some recognizable faces there. All right, let's give it a wave. Just a few seconds so we can capture everything.
I'm waving. Come on.
All right. All right, got it. Thanks, everybody.
Terrific. Thanks, David.
Ralph,
Right.
You put your best side forward, didn't you?
I was impressed with that. I have exactly the same T-shirt, and it took me a bit of effort to get it as well. So yeah, join the club. Excellent. Right, and I think, Marc, I'm going to hand over to you for the next slide, and if you'll take it through and pass the conversation into Tara mode.
Right. Well, I wanted to just say a word or two about Tara Saylor and why she's here. We didn't know each other until we started talking about having her join this session. Sharon Weaver recommended that we invite her in. Tara has a deep background in communications and has all kinds of great thoughts about how the communications discipline can fit into the maturity model and vice versa. I was very impressed, Tara. You took to this like a duck to water, and I think you've got some great thoughts to share with the group here. I also did want to reiterate something that I typed in the chat. We're going to record this up through the slides that Tara is going to go through, and we'll let you know when we're going to turn off the recording. We know we want to have a safe space in this, and we'll make sure to ring the bell when we're turning off the recording. If that bothers anyone, just let us know in the chat. We'll take it under advisement. So Tara, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and take it away?
Yeah, and I actually do not have the slides open in desktop mode. If somebody else wants to share, that would help.
Oh yeah, sorry, David
Simon
dropped
needs to grab it back
dropped
again.
the session and I didn't restart it. My bad.
I figured he'd do that while I was going on and rambling and.
Yeah, I was looking at the conversations. Here we go. Oh no, we don't want me in there. Hang on, let me just kill that and start that again.
Oh, that's okay. We can do it while I ramble. So I am someone who did not mean to end up in the IS world or the software world. I actually started out as in advertising, but as I started to work in advertising and work in communication, I got more and more interested in how does information get around and the systems that we use to do it, which led me to working on enterprise software and intranets and really studying things like how does email work more effectively and how do we measure the effectiveness of internal communication. So I have a master's degree in communication studies. I love that stuff so much that I went and got extra degrees on it. And then I'm also very much I am a lifelong Mac user who has been won over by Office 365, and I'm actually kind of an Office 365 advocate at this point. So did not see that coming, but I'm very excited about it. So what I wanted to walk through today, and we can just go ahead and jump into the meat and potatoes of things, is a little bit of what communication is. And I don't know if I can advance these or.
Simon, move forward.
Okay. Oh, yep. So at the heart of what communication is communication is a matter of, this is the 101. There's somebody with a message. They take that message, they format it somehow. We often think about it as email or, something we post out on our intranets or something, but it could be meetings, it could be phone calls, it could be chats. And then that message is sent over to recipients. And what this model does not talk about is communication has to be understood by those recipients before it's effective. So the model really is designed to talk about, okay, communication is, here is our message, we package it up, we deliver it to people. But we all know that just sending out an email does not mean that people will do what we want. So that piece is very much hidden in this discussion. And if you jump ahead to the next one, there's another layer that you really start to see on communication in bigger organizations, or as we think about it in modern time, and that's the feedback loop back to the sender. And that can be more formal feedback, or if you want a very ripped from the headlines real world example, we send out an email on Friday morning telling people that we were shutting down the system. And I got to spend the rest of Friday responding to people who emailed back with questions about what was happening on the system. So communication is really kind of this two-way back and forth that is happening. And when I'm talking about communication for the maturity model, I'm really talking about it in terms of more formal messaging. There's also obviously a lot of interpersonal back and forth. There's always a lot of collaboration that we're getting done. And that is, you're talking to people, you're typing, you're working together. That's definitely communication. But it's because of the focus and how you go about it. This is more focused on more formal enterprise communication than that collaboration work. And if you get into the next slide, I think it is actually really looking a little bit at how communication can vary in complexity. And we really wanted to make sure to call out in this that everything it can vary across levels. You can have tactical messages as a level 5 organization or 500 level. You can have strategic messages as a 100 level organization. It's really not something that is mutually exclusive. In general, though, as you look at these, things are going to move from the tactical, simple, informal over to the more strategic, complex, and regulated and global. And so, a tactical message is something like, hey, system's going to be down system outage gets complex a little bit. That's probably a bad example, but tactical comes up with something like, parking garage is closed. Whereas strategic is something much more if you're announcing a corporate acquisition and you're talking about the company's business strategy. Simple, here we said it's something like a system outage. Hey, it's down. Hey, it's back up. Complex would be really understanding what are the redundancy plans if something is down and how do we manage it. And it's not that, it's still pretty operational stuff, but there's a lot of it you've got to be thinking about. Informal, that's very much, hey, let's send an email out and tell everybody hey, we've got tacos for lunch today, come down and get some. Versus we thought about just saying formal or proofread, but we realized that the other side is really things that are regulated. Anytime you start talking about HR, you start talking about employment messages, you start talking about company earnings, all of that gets in. Anytime that someone will care if you don't do it a certain way, that is really where regulation comes in. And then finally, you get from this local aspect where it's, a small group of people to something that's global. And I realize as we work remote, your team that you work with may be in a whole bunch of different places. So it's really kind of a small scale to mass in complexity.
If I could just jump in for a second, Tara. I mean, I think one of the reasons that understanding these dimensions is important is we have a whole portfolio of options, right? I mean, we could be posting news in a SharePoint site to meet some of these needs, and for other of these needs, you actually may even need to be sitting down in person with a person, right? The classic, we're going to fire you. You don't want to do that over text, right? And for those of you who are dating, don't do that over text either. So you really have to think about which of the options in your portfolio make the most sense for each kind of communication that you're doing. And this is something that Tara knows backwards and forwards, but a lot of people, especially on the technical side, just don't think enough about. We think, oh, well, no big deal. We'll just send out an email and everyone will see it. Maybe.
And yeah, this, I think you can kind of jump through and go ahead and load all of these up. This is one of Susan's slides that talks a little bit more on that point, which is really saying that there's a lot of different channels, and different channels really match different types of conversation. So we're not in this one necessarily trying to advocate for this is when you use Yammer versus this is when you use Teams versus this is when you use Outlook. But all of those together, communication can happen across a lot of channels. And the reason it's good to call that out is actually the point on the next slide, which is to say that communication is, the technology is here. Communications technology across the past, I would say, Office 365 is just a game changer when it comes to the capabilities for communication. The ease of how you can do a lot of these things, the systems that are available, the choices of Teams versus Outlook versus Yammer versus email versus, there is a lot there. But the technology is here. The problem is the processes behind the technology and the people. Just because you have a lot of tools and a lot of ways you can do things, that doesn't always mean that you've got a full structure in place to support what the technology can do. And I understand that is a recurring theme for all of you in this meeting. So here is a look at how communication could look at level 100. And this again is, none of this is bad. If you've got a 3-person consultancy or a 50-person company that has, really consistent ways of working, you may never need to get more advanced than this. And a lot of times this is, messages are created when they're needed. They're sent out as, hey, head of HR says, oh, got to send this message. They write up the message, they hit send. Head of product development puts something together and just hit send. It's coming by the leaders. It's coming from the voices of authority, like a lead programmer might be somebody sending things out. There's not really a lot of audience segmentation needed. You're pretty much telling, hey, everybody on this project, here it is. And you don't really have to worry about, you're usually not talking about things with complexity that you don't have to worry about the project manager saying one thing and the program manager saying another thing. So it's really kind of a, hey, this is my area. I know what's going on. I'll shoot out an update. Good to go. And that's not a bad place to be. It's a very simple place to be. And if it's working, don't break it. I think a lot on these when they talk about sending out a whole company, having a whole company Teams channel. That would be great for a company that's in level 100 that wants to have, here's a quick ad hoc update and you can have some quick clarifying conversation about it or, more detailed conversation about it, but you don't need a lot of process around it.
And just to sort of reiterate, one of the themes that I keep reinforcing is, you might have an organization that should be operating at level 300 or so on average, but if level 100 communication works for you, then there's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't mean the organization is terrible or even that the organization is not operating at the appropriate level. It just means that for that organization, lower levels are all they need.
Yeah, and you may, depending on what industry you are in, you may need very complex systems in other places, but communication can be simple. So don't make it harder than it needs to be. So level 2 is then adding a little bit more structure around it. And these are going to be things where you probably have shared inboxes start to show up. So this comes from the development, or this comes from, I pick on HR a lot just because they do send out lots of messages in many companies. Or and you'll have a shared inbox that is sending things. You probably have some processes where, if I want a message sent, I go to the person who can send it for me. I tell them what I need to have sent. They package it up and they hit send. This is still probably going to be more pushing out information to people versus necessarily having a lot of back and forth and discussion. And you probably are going to start looking for vanity metrics here. How many people went to the page? And vanity metrics is something that we would talk about a lot in communications because they're not business metrics. They're the ones that make you feel good, like, oh, people read my email, people looked at my website, people looked at my pages, but they're not looking into things like, did this get the people who work at the company to take the action we needed? Did we get people installing this new software upgrade because of the email, or did they just open it? And so, that's usually going to be things, hey, let's send it from the shared inbox on Tuesday so that we know that this is happening. Then stepping ahead to level 3, I hope you're starting to see how this is coming together. Level 3 is really starting to get standardized around communications. And honestly, this is where I see a lot of larger companies. Communications will be something that you might have 1 or 2 people doing full time, but there are a lot of communicators who are working on specific areas only or looking at a specific audience. You might have a communicator who looks at all your people in the UK and one who looks at all your people in Germany. You start to use things like surveys. You start to look for feedback mechanisms. You start to have some rules of thumb across what the company uses. Oh, yeah, for things like this, we always send email. Oh, for things like this, we would post it to our intranet. Here is where you're probably going to start seeing some checks and gates around communication. For example, this is where you might see, okay, we lock down our main distribution list so everybody, not just anybody can send a message. It has to be someone who has some approval, and you can't just email the whole company. You might start to see some calendaring happening here where people say, okay, we know that there's a priority happening in this department in February, and then we know there's an initiative happening in March. So let's just kind of break up our schedule so we're not trying to do it all at once or communicate it all at once. And you'll start to see some high-level governance docs coming together where you might say, okay, this is our style guide for the intranet. This is what we expect. So here it is really, you start to see policies, you start to see processes and procedures, but there's still a lot of flexibility where, there's a lot of reacting still to the needs of the business, where if something's kind of coming up, you respond to what that need is. And there's still a lot of people who are going to be more focused on, okay, how do I support the people in my country or in my business unit or in my program? And, oh yeah, I don't care about the stuff that other parts of the company are doing. I'm really focused on just my program and the rest can go away. And you might see a lot of variance between those different communication group.
I think Tara, in your experience, for the organizations that get to this level, as opposed to the lower levels, which are a bit ad hoc, by the time you get to more mature organizations running at this kind of level, what benefits do you see those organizations getting from their various communication processes?
It really benefits the people getting hit with the messages. So when you're hitting this level 300, you're starting to worry about overload messages where you get 5 messages in the same day and nothing for 2 weeks, or you're starting to worry about how do we have a coordinated voice across messages so that what the CTO is saying doesn't contradict what the CFO is saying. So really, when you start to put these processes together, it's not being driven so much by Yes, I mean, communications is exciting. Communicators will be excited to have a plan and a schedule. We love those. But it's more being driven by the end result. We are creating a better experience for the employees we're emailing or contacting or communicating with.
Okay, so that's interesting perspective for me. So this is more about sort of driving organizational culture and less about sort of risk management and sort of data loss prevention, or Mr. Musk saying the wrong thing that will upset the investors. So this is more about that. Let's make sure that our people are getting a good experience and communicating well, and we're reinforcing the messages internally.
I feel very sorry for Mr. Musk's communicators. that would be a tough job for sure. Yeah, and the reason it becomes a virtuous cycle, right? So when you are having messages get to people in a better way, in a way that they want them, in a way that causes the actions you need, in a way that they're able to take those actions, that is then going to support whatever it is that the business is needing. So, if you need everybody to do an upgrade and the message gets lost in the email, that's bad for the business. If you need everybody to, log into this system and more people do it because it's clearly communicated, that's better for the program that the business is running. So it kind of is, a virtuous cycle that starts to build. You might, to your point about some of the regulatory things, if you're communicating about earnings at this part, you are going to be following lots and lots of very highly regulated pieces. Same for, again, if you get into some of the HR benefits things or even strategic acquisition, you're really going to have to be watching regulatory requirements there. But you'll probably have people who are more aware of how to do that kind of communication within the regulatory environment. If you wanted me to rattle off employment laws in the US, I could, not because I worked in HR, but because I communicated about acquisitions enough that's something that I had experience with.
One of the other sort of lenses you could use for this, because communication happens at all different levels, and some of the stuff that Tara is talking about is communicating from, sort of a corporate communications perspective. But one of the things that we spend a lot of time on when we're building intranets is, the site owners have to know how to communicate. They need to be able to communicate what they actually need to tell the organization. So the HR person talking about benefits, or the finance person telling people how to fill out timesheets. So there are some sort of corollary things that you end up doing around collaboration to support good communication. For example, we often will create a team for all of the site owners to talk to each other, so they're communicating well and they're helping each other figure out how to do things, and that makes them all better communicators. So sometimes the levers that you're pulling are not communication per se. They're, let's edge a little collaboration in here so that communication improves. And I think this level 300 is about where we start to see that kind of activity. It's not just, hey, all the site owners can just say whatever they want to the organization, which is more like a 100, that organically grown intranet that is nonsensical, nobody understands, everybody's communicating differently. Here you're starting to see a lot more of that consistency, a lot more of that common framing for messaging.
Yeah, and I would say that's the level 300 is definitely where I start to see communicators as develop a community of practice, or kind of a best practices that they want to share among themselves for the organization. Then jumping up to level 4, level 400, level 400 really starts to get into, you would need a larger organization or a more mature organization that really focuses on communication to start hitting this level. And it's not that it's not that there's something magical about size, but it's more a matter of really, for internal communications, you need to have a certain employee base to start justifying these larger programmatic changes. Internal communications, it's notoriously difficult to show the ROI on communications because, you know, they're not outselling things. This is very much more the enterprise communications versus marketing or something like that. But this is where you're starting to get into a pretty sophisticated model where the communications inside the company are being run with best practices that you would see in the marketing world or the PR world or external social media advertising, for example. But this is where you're really starting to think about communications as campaigns. So if level 100 is an ad hoc, oh crap, I need to tell somebody this, quick, I'll get that up there. Level 400 might be where you're starting to engage people. All right, we've got a year-long ambition to deliver this project. How are we going to run this across that year-long period? This is where you're also going to start seeing some really sophisticated change management programs running, because change management obviously involves a lot of talking about communication. It involves much, much more. But this is where you start to see, okay, we have something to tell people. Let's think about how we tell it across multiple channels. Instead of just putting a video out on the intranet, you think, okay, I have a video. I'll use it in the town hall meeting. I'll use it here. I'll use it here. I'll cut a clip and drop it in an email. You start to look at more sophisticated targeting of employees. So at level 300, you're probably thinking, all right, let's hit everybody who has reports up through the CFO. Let's hit everybody in the company who works in Germany. Level 400, you start to get more sophisticated where you're looking at things like, you know, oh, hey, maybe we have opt-in, or maybe we run a program that is really focused on our new joiners. And this entire program is going to focus on helping them feel like they're welcome to the company and part of it. You're going to start using analytics to plan your future strategies. So that's where you might say, okay, great, stories about this topic. For example, stories about our customers generate a lot of comments. Let's run more of those because we're trying to get people interested in this topic. Or, oh, if we send an email at 5 p.m., strangely, we get a ton of action on that because people are like looking for something simple to close the day. Let's make sure we do a follow-up email at 5 p.m. Here is where you also start getting into more management of out-of-date content. Level 300 and below, there's a lot of just, okay, what's in front of us, let's respond to it. What's in front of us, let's respond to it. Level 400, you start to have kind of the maturity to think about, okay, what is the whole life cycle of this communication? When do I pull this content down? When is it no longer useful? And it's really, really starting to make communications integrated very directly to the business objectives. You're not just thinking, let's get people to sign up for our wellness program, or we need people to be aware of this system that's going to be changing. And this is where you're starting to think about things like, how do we make sure that people understand the strategy behind this launch, and doing it in a programmatic way.
So my observation is, you said at the beginning, sort of level 400 tends to be like an enterprise type of approach to communication. And I totally agree with that. My observation is that even if you're a non-enterprise scale organization, if you're carrying out some communication activities, and that might be a client-facing activity, or it might be a major change program internally, even if you're not up at level 300 even, you might still choose to adopt level 400 communication for that high impact or strategically important activity. Everything else can still be at low level, but this thing, you adopt these higher level processes. You want to get the impact and measure the impact and feed the impact back into the creation process and go around and around that loop, because getting it wrong has consequences. So yeah, so for me it's really important. You can just cherry pick sometimes and go, hey, we're just going to do really good stuff for this one strategic activity, and then go back to day-to-day work with everything else.
Just sort of talk about analytics. In sort of organisations that you've worked in, do they measure actually? Say you talked about signing up to the wellness program. Do they actually, do you measure how many people have signed up to the wellness program to see actually if the action that's being asked for happens? Is that something as well?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different methodologies and best practices around communication measurement, but usually when you send out a communication, you can see a corresponding bump within if the action you want people to take is sign up for wellness program, usually what you see is an email or a message or a push will happen, and there's a corresponding spike in that activity. And if you want to get very academic about it, you can't necessarily prove that it was that email that caused it. But this is where, business analytics has a little flexibility that academia may not, where you can say, all right, if every time I see it send an email out, I see a corresponding bump, I can feel pretty confident that another email is going to cause that bump. And yeah, you have to look beyond just, did that email get opened? Did that email get read? You start to look for what are those other numbers that you can look at to help define that it's doing what the objective is. The objective is get people to sign up for wellness or support this change or install this software. It's not get them to read the email.
Yeah, I was listening to a Cautionary Tales podcast just on my drive over here today, and that was talking about an actual study they did about hand washers, these antimicrobial dispensers, and in hospitals. And some were saying, you doctors, nurses, you need to wash your hands more often, and above others it said because it's good for you, and others it said you need to wash your hands more often because it's good for the patients. And the patients one had far more impact on changing. They had a 50% increase in consumption of the consumable in the dispenser. So I think the point is that it is exactly about that. What is your strategy? Is it just to have people look at the thing, or is it to get people to take an action? What action are you seeking? And then crafting the message appropriately and delivering it in the appropriate way, whether that's sticky things above hand dispensers or something else.
Yeah,
and measuring it is important. That's a level 400 activity they did because they went on to continue to measure the impact of this around the hospital.
Yeah, and it's funny that the small things that you think, every single organization I've been in, everyone says, please don't send me email. But if you look at what gets them to take action, boy, is it email. So, what people say and what people actually respond to, something like a sign over the bathroom sink saying, wash your hands for 30 seconds, still encourages people and makes a difference.
I think Ralph's just making an interesting observation about there are thousands of places where communications are delivered within a large organization, and you've got to think really carefully, I guess, about what is the hierarchy of impact. As you say, maybe in an organization, email is still the one that people respond to. In my organizations, actually, we've switched over to Teams messages. Those are the ones that have the most immediate impact for us, and maybe text messages as well. They grab my attention because it's not part of the background noise, whereas email has a very low priority in my organization. And so it's about understanding what that what that impact of any given message is, and how do you get through to people that this one's high priority.
And to the Microsoft specific analytics, I have a strong stance on that one, where Microsoft really delivers better system. How is it working? Are people using it? They don't quite get communications metrics. You might need to be working with a third-party vendor to get more sophisticated communication metrics. And that's actually a fantastic transition into number 5, or the 500 level, which is really, when you're at the level 500, your internal best practices are really mirroring communications best practices. And it's really looking at message delivery systems that reflect user preferences. So that's where you can start getting into, okay, people like text messages, we'll send them text messages. Or you might even be at a point you can let them sign up where they can decide, do I want this sent to me in email? Do I want this sent to me in Teams? Do I want this sent to me by text message? This is where communicators are starting to serve as SMEs on company initiative teams. And that's kind of with the idea that companies may not be wanting to bring everything up to this level, because it may not all need to be at this level. But this is where, when you're planning a big change, you say, okay, I need, finance, IT, communications, and legal all at the table. Analytics become real time and they really drive your tactics. You're not just waiting till after the fact to see what happens, but you're looking at wow, okay, nobody looked at this. Let me revise how I approach it. Or that Slack message got, nobody noticed it. Let me try putting a GIF at the bottom of it to draw some attention. It can be very simple, but you're looking at it in real time and reacting and course correcting. This is where you're usually starting to get into, you've got this is the look of our companies in communications. This is our voice. This is all that brand kind of stuff that marketing tends to have in place. And this is where you've got really close partnerships between the people who own different tools like SharePoint, like Office 365, like Teams, and the people who are creating. And you're basically working together to figure out, okay, here's this thing that Teams does now. Is it relevant? How do we adopt it? How do we make it really good for our company? And again, this might be something that you are doing for a specific strategic change program or initiative, and other pieces could be much lower, which is just fine.
Cool.
It's great.
Right.
I mean, Ralph has made a couple of points about, how the platform, does all of these things. And Tara made that point right up front. Yes, it does all those things, but that doesn't mean that people are using it that way. And I think that there's always a lot of talk about adoption. Let's get people to use all the things, but we're talking about it from a different perspective. Let's get people to accomplish what they need to accomplish using the things that make sense. And so, adoption is important, but sort of, is it driving the communication you want, the collaboration you want, the whatever you want, whichever of the competencies you're focusing on at the time. Sorry to interrupt, Tara.
No, I think that's always good to reinforce. And yeah, there are so many cool functions that may not be the company just doesn't have the processes to support using them consistently. Or I saw someone mention that Yammer, had that bad reputation from long ago. And, that's where culture comes in. You may never have a company want to use Yammer, no matter how great the functionality is, because it just has left a bad taste in their mouth.